"I grieved you," he said, the words rough, as if torn from his throat. "I built you a tomb of marble and gold." Alara simply stared back at him, her hands, chapped and raw from mending fishing nets, curled into fists at her side. A small boy, no older than 7, with the Duke of Blackwood's own slate-gray eyes, clung to her skirts, his gaze a mixture of fear and defiance. "A tomb is a cage for the dead, Your Grace," she finally answered, her voice as weathered as the sea-sprayed cottage behind her. "I have no use for cages anymore." What happens when a ghost from the past is not a ghost at all, but a wife and son a powerful duke was told had died 7 years ago? Duke Alistair believed he had buried his heart in a cold, ornate mausoleum beside his wife, Alara, and their stillborn son. For 7 years he lived in a self-imposed exile of grief and duty, his grand estate a monument to his loss. But when a small boy with his own eyes knocks on his door, the carefully constructed tomb of his life begins to crack, revealing a horrifying lie that has festered for years. Now, Alistair must confront the woman he thought he had lost, a woman forged into steel by hardship, and the son who is a living testament to his own blindness. To reclaim his family, he must do more than apologize. He must dismantle the conspiracy that tore them apart and atone for the sins of his past, one painful, humbling act at a time. But can a love he never truly valued be rebuilt from the ashes of such a devastating betrayal? And would you forgive the man who unknowingly paid for your grave? The air in Blackwood Manor was a preserved thing, trapped under glass like a butterfly. It held the scent of beeswax, old paper, and a faint, cloying sweetness from the potpourri bowls Lady Beatrice, the Duke's aunt, insisted be placed in every room. It was the smell of stagnation, of life held in perfect, suffocating stillness. Alara, Duchess of Blackwood, felt she was breathing it into her very bones. She sat in a high-backed chair by the window, her hands resting on the swell of her belly, and watched the rain streak down the leaded glass. Each drop was a gray tear on a gray world. Outside, the gardens were immaculate, even in the downpour. Hedges were trimmed into severe, geometric shapes, and the rose bushes stood like disciplined soldiers, their blooms tight and unforgiving. There was no wildness here, no room for errant growth, just like inside the manor, just like inside her marriage. Alistair, the Duke, was a man carved from the same stone as his ancestral home. He was handsome, powerful, and as emotionally remote as the moon. When he had first courted her, she had mistaken his quiet intensity for depth, his reserve for a thoughtful nature. She had imagined a well of feeling beneath the stoic surface. Now, nearly a year into their marriage, and with their first child weeks from arriving, she knew the truth. The well was either dry or so deeply buried she would never find its waters. His coldness had grown in tandem with her pregnancy. At first it was a subtle shift, a hand withdrawn too quickly, a conversation that ended before it began. Now it was a chasm between them, wide and silent. He looked at her not with love or even duty, but with a kind of pained disappointment she could not comprehend. He spent his days closeted in his study with estate papers, and his evenings in the library with a bottle of brandy. The vast, echoing house was their shared prison, and they were its solitary inmates. The only other soul who seemed to thrive in the oppressive atmosphere was Lady Beatrice. She had raised Alistair after his parents' early deaths, and her influence over him was absolute. She was a woman of sharp angles and sharper words, her smile a thin, bloodless line. She moved through the halls of Blackwood like a wraith, her black silk gowns whispering over the polished floors. She had taken Alara's delicate condition as her personal project, overseeing her diet, her rest, her very thoughts. "You must conserve your strength, dear," Beatrice would say, her voice a silken rasp. "The Blackwood line has always been vigorous. It can be taxing on a woman of a more fragile constitution." The implication was always there, that Alara was not strong enough, not worthy enough, to carry the ducal heir. And with every passing day, as a strange lethargy settled deeper into her limbs, Alara began to believe it. Beatrice brought her tonics in small, dark bottles, foul-smelling concoctions that she promised would fortify her. Dr. Finch prepared it himself, she would assure, patting Alara's hand with fingers that felt like cold twigs. He is the finest physician in the county. The tonics made her feel worse. A constant, low-grade nausea clung to her, and a strange fog seemed to settle over her mind. When she mentioned this to Alistair one evening, he had simply frowned, his gray eyes distant. Beatrice knows what is best. She guided my mother through her confinements. You must trust her judgment. He had not been unkind, merely dismissive. Her feelings, her fears were an inconvenience, a disruption to the orderly running of his life. He trusted his aunt, and that was the end of the matter. The conversation was over. Alara had retreated back into her silence, the chasm between them growing wider with every unspoken word. She pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the faint, fluttering kick of the life within her. This child was her only solace, the one spark of warmth in the cold expanse of her existence. It was a secret joy, a private rebellion. Whatever happened, she would protect this child. She would love it with all the fierce, desperate energy she was forbidden from showing its father. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending a shower of orange sparks up the chimney. The sound was sharp, violent, in the profound quiet of the room. Alara started, her heart thumping against her ribs. She felt a sudden, inexplicable wave of dread wash over her, cold and heavy as the rain outside. It was a premonition, a whisper of a future she could not see but could feel, gathering like the storm clouds overhead. The stillness of Blackwood Manor was not peace. It was the held breath before a scream. The scream, when it came, was her own. It began weeks later, in the dead of night, a sharp, tearing pain that ripped her from a fitful sleep. The birth had come too soon, too violently. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. Servants rushed through the halls, their footsteps echoing like gunshots in the silence. Alistair appeared at her door, his face pale and strained in the candlelight, but Beatrice was there first, a firm hand on his arm. "This is no place for you, Alistair," she said, her voice calm and authoritative. "A man should not witness such things. It is women's work. Go downstairs. We will call you when it is over." He hesitated, his gaze falling on Alara, a flicker of something, fear, concern, in his gray eyes. But it was fleeting. He gave a stiff nod, allowing his aunt to guide him from the room. The door clicked shut, sealing Alara in with the pain, with Beatrice, and with the grim-faced Dr. Finch, who had arrived with an unnerving swiftness. The hours that followed were a blur of agony and confusion. The fog that had clouded her mind for weeks thickened, turning the room into a swirling vortex of shadows and distorted faces. Beatrice's voice was a constant drone, murmuring about weakness and fragility. Dr. Finch's hands were rough and impatient as he examined her. The midwife she had requested, a kind-faced woman from the village, was nowhere to be seen. "A sudden illness in her family," Beatrice had explained dismissively. "Dr. Finch is more than capable." Through the haze of pain, Alara fought. She fought for the child she could feel struggling within her. But she was so weak, so utterly exhausted. The tonics had done their work, sapping the strength from her muscles, the clarity from her mind. It felt as if she were drowning in slow motion. Then, after an eternity of torment, a final, desperate push. A thin, wavering cry filled the room, impossibly fragile. A son. She saw a flash of dark hair, a small, wrinkled face. "My baby," she whispered, reaching out. "Let me hold my son." But Beatrice intercepted the bundle as the doctor passed it over. She stood between Alara and her child, her body a black wall. Rest now, dear, she cooed, her voice dangerously soft. You are exhausted. You've done your duty. Something was wrong. The baby's cry had been silenced too quickly. A terrible, chilling dread cut through Alara's exhaustion. Let me see him, she demanded, her voice a hoarse croak. Beatrice, give me my son. Dr. Finch moved to her bedside, a syringe in his hand. Just something to help you sleep, Your Grace, he said, his eyes avoiding hers. You need to recover your strength. No, Alara pleaded, trying to push his hand away, but her limbs felt like lead. She looked past him, to Beatrice, who was now rocking the silent bundle in her arms. The look on her aunt-in-law's face was not one of joy or concern. It was a look of cold, final triumph. The needle pricked her arm. A wave of icy blackness rushed up to meet her. Her last conscious thought was of her son, her silent, unseen son. Her last sight was of Beatrice's triumphant smile. Downstairs, Alistair paced the length of the library. The fire had died down to embers, and the brandy in his glass remained untouched. For hours, he had listened to the muffled sounds from above, his gut twisting with an anxiety he refused to name. He was the Duke. He was supposed to be in control, impassive, strong. But the faint, terrified cries of his wife had unmanned him. The silence that had fallen an hour ago was worse. It was a heavy, profound emptiness that seemed to suck the very air from the room. He told himself it was over, that soon Beatrice would come and tell him he had a son, an heir. He would do his duty, express the appropriate satisfaction, and then life would return to its orderly, predictable course. When the door finally opened, it was Beatrice alone. Her face, usually a mask of stern composure, was streaked with tears. Her expression was one of perfectly calibrated tragedy. Alistair's heart stopped. Alistair, she began, her voice breaking with practiced sorrow. Oh, my dear boy. She didn't need to say the words. He saw it all in her performance. He felt the floor drop out from beneath him. The child, a boy. He was too small, too weak, she whispered, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. He did not draw breath. Alistair felt a strange numbness spread through him, a cold tide rising from his feet to his chest. A stillborn son, the Blackwood heir, gone before he had even lived. And Alara? He asked, his own voice sounding distant, foreign. Beatrice's face crumpled. She was so fragile, Alistair. I warned you. Her constitution was not suited for this. The labor, it took everything from her. She bled. Dr. Finch did all he could, but... She trailed off, her shoulders shaking with a sob. She followed the baby not an hour ago. She is at peace now. Dead. Both of them. The word did not compute. It was a blunt, ugly sound that had no place in his well-ordered world. He stared at his aunt, his mind a complete blank. He could not process the magnitude of the loss. He could only register the silence from upstairs, the absolute, final silence. I am so sorry, my dear, Beatrice said, taking his hand. You are the Duke. You must be strong. But I will take care of everything, all the arrangements. You need not trouble yourself. He allowed her to lead him to a chair. He sat, stiff and unseeing, as she spoke in low tones about funeral rites and notifying the family. He felt nothing. It was as if he were watching a play, a tragic drama in which he was the lead actor, but had forgotten all his lines. The grief, he assumed, would come later. For now there was only a vast, hollow emptiness where his wife and son should have been. He had failed. He, the Duke of Blackwood, had failed to protect his line, had failed to protect his wife. He had stood by and trusted, and in the end, it had all turned to dust. The coldness he had shown Alara in recent months rushed back at him, a bitter, acidic taste in his mouth. He had let her face her fear alone, and now she was gone, The weight of that realization was the first crack in the ice of his shock, a sliver of agonizing pain that promised a universe of regret to come. Alara awoke to the jarring rattle of carriage wheels on a rough, unpaved road. Her head throbbed, and her body ached with a deep, profound soreness. For a moment she was lost, adrift in a fog of confusion. Then memory returned, sharp and brutal. The pain, the birth, Beatrice's triumphant smile, the needle. She sat up with a gasp, her eyes flying open. She was not in her lavish bedchamber at Blackwood. She was in a simple, cramped carriage, the air thick with the smell of hay and damp wool. A young woman sat across from her, her face pale with worry. It was Mary, one of the younger housemaids, a girl Alara had always treated with kindness. "Mary, what is happening? Where is my baby?" Alara's voice was a frantic whisper. Tears welled in the maid's eyes. She reached into a large wicker basket at her feet and carefully lifted a swaddled bundle. "He is here, Your Grace. He is safe." Alara's breath hitched. She reached out with trembling hands and took the small, warm weight into her arms. Pushing back the worn blanket, she saw him, her son. He was so small, his face pale and still, but as she watched, his tiny chest rose and fell in a shallow, steady rhythm. He was alive. A sob of pure, unadulterated relief escaped her. She clutched him to her chest, burying her face in the soft wool, inhaling the sweet, milky scent of him. He was alive. "What happened, Mary? Tell me everything," she commanded, her voice gaining strength. Mary twisted her hands in her lap. "It was Lady Beatrice, Your Grace, and the doctor. They plotted it. I heard them talking weeks ago. They said you were weak, that you and the baby wouldn't survive the birth. It was all lies." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The tonics that made her ill, the dismissal of the trusted midwife, the speed with which she was drugged after the birth. It wasn't a tragedy. It was an execution. "They told the Duke you were dead," Mary continued, her voice trembling. "Both of you. I saw them take another bundle. From the room. They showed it to him. He believes you are gone." The betrayal was so absolute, so monstrous, it was almost impossible to comprehend. Beatrice, who had pretended to care for her. Alistair. What of Alistair? Did he know? Was he part of it? The memory of his coldness, his dismissal of her fears, his blind trust in his aunt. It all pointed to a terrible conclusion. He had wanted her gone. He had let it happen. The pain of that thought was sharper than any physical agony she had endured. It was a clean, deep cut to the heart. "Where are we going?" Alara asked, her voice now devoid of emotion. It was as if a switch had been thrown inside her. The soft, trusting Duchess was gone, replaced by something harder, colder. "To a cottage miles from here," Mary explained. "A cousin of mine. She will take us in. Lady Beatrice gave me money to disappear, to take the body away for a quiet burial. She thinks I am disposing of you, but I couldn't, Your Grace. It wasn't right." Alara looked at the loyal maid, her heart swelling with a gratitude so immense it almost broke through her newfound armor. This girl had risked everything for her. "You have saved us, Mary," she said simply. She looked down at her son, now stirring in her arms. He had his father's dark hair, and when his eyes fluttered open, she saw it with a jolt. The same unmistakable slate gray. A painful inheritance. She would name him Leo, for his lion-hearted courage in surviving his own birth. She looked at her hands. The heavy gold wedding band and the glittering diamond engagement ring felt like shackles. They were symbols of a life that had been a lie, a gilded cage she had almost died in. With a decisive twist, she pulled them from her finger. She took the ducal signet ring, the one that marked her as Alistair's wife, and placed it on the carriage seat, a silent message for whoever found the abandoned vehicle. The Duchess of Blackwood was dead. She had to be. Mary pushed a small, rough-spun bag into her hands. "It is not much, Your Grace. My savings, and some plain clothes." Elara nodded, her mind already working, calculating. She was no longer a duchess. She was a mother with a child to protect. She was a survivor. From this moment on, she would be Eleanor Thorne, and she would never, ever be weak again. The next 7 years were etched onto Alistair's face. The hollows under his eyes deepened, and silver threaded its way through his dark hair at the temples. Blackwood Manor became his mausoleum, a place of perfect, echoing silence. He moved through its grand rooms like a ghost, his only companion the ever-present Lady Beatrice, who managed his household with suffocating efficiency. She had tried to press him toward a new marriage, presenting eligible young ladies like prize heifers, but he had refused. The part of him that could have loved, or even pretended to, had been buried in the marble tomb at the edge of the estate. He visited the tomb every week. It was a grand, overwrought structure of white marble and gold leaf. Inside, the inscription on the sarcophagus was stark: "Elara, beloved Duchess of Blackwood, and infant son, taken too soon." He would stand in the cold, silent air, a single white rose in his hand, and feel nothing. The sharp agony of the early days had long ago faded into a dull, chronic ache, a phantom limb that throbbed with a loss he could no longer clearly remember. He could barely recall Elara's face, her features blurring into a generic, tragic portrait of a lost wife. The grief was a habit, a duty, like signing estate papers or attending sessions in the House of Lords. It was part of the architecture of his life. The crack in that architecture appeared on a rainy Tuesday in October. He was in the library, sorting through a box of his mother's old books, when a folded piece of stationery slipped from between the pages of a poetry collection. It was a letter, written in a familiar, elegant hand. It was from Elara's mother, sent a month before the disastrous birth. He read the words, and a strange unease began to stir in him. "Elara sounds so full of life," her mother had written. "She writes of walking in the gardens for an hour each day, and says her health has never been more robust. I am so pleased she is proving to be such a strong, vital mother-to-be. She has the constitution of a country girl, for all her delicate looks." The constitution of a country girl, robust, strong, vital. The words were a direct contradiction to the narrative Beatrice had so carefully woven for 7 years. "So fragile," his aunt had always said, an inherent weakness in her bloodline. He had accepted it without question. He had accepted everything without question. Alistair sat back in his chair, the letter trembling in his hand. For the first time in 7 years, he allowed himself to truly think back to that time. He remembered Elara's growing lethargy, the strange fogginess she complained of. He remembered the tonics Beatrice had insisted upon. He remembered the midwife from the village, the one Elara had liked, being suddenly replaced by the severe Dr. Finch. A cold suspicion, ugly and unwelcome, began to uncoil in his gut. He started asking questions, quietly at first. A casual inquiry to a neighboring lord revealed that Dr. Finch had retired abruptly, mere weeks after Elara's death, and moved to the continent. He had apparently come into a sizable, unexplained inheritance. Alistair then sent a trusted man, his solicitor, to the village where the original midwife was said to have family. The solicitor returned a week later with a disturbing report. The midwife, a woman named Agnes, had not been called away by a family illness. She had been paid a significant sum of money, anonymously, to leave the county for a month. She had always feared it had something to do with the Duchess's death, and had lived in fear ever since. The pieces were beginning to form a picture so monstrous he could barely look at it. He needed more. He needed to be certain. He hired a private investigator from London, a discreet man named Sharp, known for his tenacity. He gave him 2 tasks: find out everything about Dr. Finch's finances, and track down the young housemaid, Mary, who had also vanished from the estate records around the same time. Meanwhile, in a small, wind-battered cottage in the coastal village of Port Blossom, Eleanor Thorne was mending a fishing net. The rough twine was coarse against her calloused fingers. The smell of salt and fish was permanently ingrained in her clothes, her hair, her skin. Her face was weathered by the sun and wind, her body lean and strong from years of hard work. The soft, pale Duchess was a distant memory, a ghost of another woman's life. "Mama!" A boy's voice called from the doorway. Leo stood there, his dark hair tousled by the sea breeze, his cheeks flushed. In his hand, he clutched a small, intricately carved wooden boat. "Old Man Hemlock helped me fix the sail." Ilara smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that lit up her face. "It's beautiful, my love. You'll be the fastest captain in the harbor." Leo beamed. He was a bright, happy child, full of life and questions. He knew no other life than this, the simple, harsh beauty of the village. He knew his mother as a seamstress, a net mender, a woman respected for her quiet strength and quick mind. He did not know she was a duchess, or that he was the heir to one of the most powerful titles in the country. Ilara had ensured it. She had buried their past as surely as Alistair had buried their effigies in stone. She had found a strange sort of peace in Port Blossom. It was a hard life, a life of constant struggle, but it was real. It was hers. She had earned every penny, every meal, every ounce of respect. Here she was not an ornament. She was a woman of substance, and she had her son. Leo was her sun, her moon, her entire world. The fierce, protective love she felt for him was the anchor of her existence. It had kept her sane, kept her strong, kept her from being consumed by the bitterness of her betrayal. She rarely thought of Alistair. When she did, it was with a cold, dead anger. She believed, with every fiber of her being, that he had been complicit in the plot to erase her. His coldness, his distance, it had all been a prelude to his final, cruel act of abandonment. He had wanted a different wife, a stronger heir, and had allowed his aunt to dispose of the problem. The marble tomb was not a monument to love, but a seal on a convenient lie. She was Eleanor Thorne. The Duchess of Blackwood was dead and buried, and that is how it would stay. The investigator's report arrived 3 months later. It was concise and damning. Sharp had traced a series of large, anonymous bank transfers. One to Dr. Finch, just before he left the country. Another, smaller one, to the midwife, Agnes. And a third, to a land agent in a remote coastal region for the purchase of a small, secluded cottage. The cottage had been bought in the name of a Mary Hobbs, the housemaid who had disappeared. The final piece of the report was a single line that made Alistair's blood run cold. "The cottage, located in the village of Port Blossom, is currently occupied by a woman known as Eleanor Thorne and her 7-year-old son." Alistair didn't wait. He didn't send a messenger. He saddled his own horse, a powerful black stallion, and rode out of Blackwood as if the hounds of hell were at his heels. He rode for 2 days, stopping only to rest the horse, his mind a maelstrom of shock, horror, and a terrifying, burgeoning hope. Could it be? After all these years? He reached Port Blossom in the late afternoon. It was a rugged, salt-scrubbed village clinging to the edge of a cliff. The air smelled of the sea. He left his horse at the local inn and walked toward the docks, his fine city clothes drawing curious stares from the fishermen. And then he saw her. She was standing on a weathered pier, her back to him, mending a large, tangled net. Her hair, the same warm brown he remembered, was pulled back in a simple braid, and the sea wind whipped loose strands around her face. She wore a plain, faded dress, nothing like the silks and velvets he remembered. But it was her, the set of her shoulders, the graceful line of her neck. He would have known her anywhere. His heart hammered against his ribs. He took a step forward, his mouth dry, the words he had rehearsed 1,000 times on his journey turning to ash on his tongue. Before he could speak, a small boy came running down the pier. "Mama! Look! A perfect crab shell!" The woman turned, a smile transforming her face, and Alistair's breath caught in his throat. It was Alara, older, weathered, but unmistakably her. She knelt to inspect the boy's treasure, her expression one of pure, unadulterated love. And the boy had his dark hair, and as he looked up, his gaze meeting Alistair's for a fleeting second, the Duke felt as if he had been struck by lightning. The boy had his eyes, the same shape, the same startling shade of slate gray. It was his son, his living, breathing, 7-year-old son. The lie he had lived with for 7 years, shattered into a million pieces. The grief, the tomb, the endless, empty mourning. It was all a fraud. They were alive. They had been alive all this time. The hope that had been a tiny spark now roared into an inferno, followed immediately by a wave of nauseating guilt. He had let this happen. He had mourned them while they were struggling to survive, cast out and abandoned. He walked toward them, his boots echoing on the wooden planks. Alara looked up as he approached, her smile vanishing as if wiped away. Her eyes widened, not with shock, but with a dawning, terrible recognition. The warmth in her expression was replaced by a sheet of ice. She rose slowly to her feet, pulling the boy behind her skirt in a fiercely protective gesture. "Alara," he breathed, the name a prayer and a curse. Her face was a mask of cold fury. "You have no right to say that name," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "The woman who owned it is dead. You should know. You paid for her grave." The confrontation moved from the public pier to the suffocating intimacy of her cottage. It was a tiny, 2-room dwelling, clean but sparse. The air smelled of dried herbs, salt, and wood smoke. Leo had been sent to a neighbor's house, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. Now they faced each other across a small, scrubbed wooden table. The chasm that had separated them in their grand manor house was nothing compared to the canyon of bitterness and betrayal that lay between them now. "You cast me out," she said, her voice shaking with a rage that had been simmering for 7 years. "You and that monster you call an aunt. You left me for dead. You left your own son for dead." "No," Alistair insisted, his hands clenched on the table. "I swear to you, Alara, I did not know. I was told you were gone. Both of you. I believed it." She laughed, a short, ugly sound devoid of humor. "You believed it because it was convenient. You never loved me. I was a duty, a broodmare to secure your line, and when I proved too fragile, you disposed of me. Do not stand there and pretend you are a victim in this." Her words were like blows, each one landing with brutal accuracy. He deserved them. He deserved all of them. He saw his past actions through her eyes now, his emotional distance, his dismissal of her fears, his blind faith in Beatrice. It was not the portrait of a conspirator, but of a fool, a cold, arrogant, negligent fool. "I was a fool," he admitted, the words tasting like poison. "I was blind and proud, and I failed you completely. But I was not part of it. I have spent the last few months uncovering the truth. Beatrice, she orchestrated everything. The doctor, the midwife, she paid them all. She lied to me. She let me build a tomb for a living woman." He laid it all out for her. The letter, the investigation, the financial records. He spoke with a desperate urgency, trying to breach the wall of her disbelief. She listened, her expression unreadable, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. When he finished, silence fell, thick and heavy. "So you were merely a pawn," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Her gullible puppet. Does that make it better, Your Grace? That you were not the villain, but simply the idiot who allowed the villain to ruin my life. You let her poison me. You ignored my suffering. You abandoned me to her care. Your ignorance is not an excuse. It is the crime itself. He had no answer to that. She was right. His inaction had been a weapon. His trust had been a death sentence. "What do you want, Alistair?" she asked, her voice weary. "Why are you here?" "I want my son," he said, the words raw with need. "And I want you. I want to undo this. I want to bring you home." "Home?" She stared at him as if he were mad. "This is my home, this tiny cottage, this hard life. This is real. Blackwood Manor was a prison. And you are a stranger with my son's eyes. You cannot undo 7 years of pain. You cannot erase this." She pointed to her calloused hands, to the lines on her face. "This is what your failure looks like. Now I want you to leave. Leave Port Blossom and never come back." He looked at her, at the formidable, unbreakable woman she had become, and he knew that begging would be useless. Grand gestures and ducal commands would mean nothing to her. He had to earn his way back into her life, 1 inch at a time. "I am not leaving," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I am not leaving my son, and I am not leaving you. Not again." He walked out of the cottage, leaving her standing in stunned silence. He went to the inn, sold his magnificent stallion and his fine riding clothes to the innkeeper for a fraction of their worth. With the money, he paid for a month's rent on a small, damp room above the tavern. He was the Duke of Blackwood, one of the wealthiest men in England, and he had just condemned himself to a lumpy mattress, coarse food, and the scorn of the woman he had wronged. It was a start. It was his penance. The Duke's presence in Port Blossom was a source of endless gossip. He was a creature from another world, his aristocratic bearing at odds with the rough wool jacket and worn boots he now wore. He did not, however, try to force his way back into Alara's life. He kept his distance, a silent, watchful presence at the edge of her world. He spent his days in a state of purgatory. He saw Leo playing on the beach, and his heart ached, with a paternal love so fierce it was a physical pain. He watched Alara haggle with fishermen over the price of their catch, her voice strong and confident, and he felt a profound, shameful admiration for the woman she had become without him. He knew words were not enough. He needed to provide proof. He sent a message to his investigator, Sharp, summoning him to Port Blossom. He needed sworn affidavits, bank records, irrefutable evidence that would tear down Beatrice's web of lies, once and for all. While he waited, he began his quiet siege. He did not approach Alara with gifts or apologies. He acted. One morning, after a fierce storm, he saw that a section of her cottage roof had been damaged. Without a word, he procured a ladder and shingles and spent the entire day in the wind and rain, repairing the damage. She watched him from her window, her expression unreadable. When he was done, he simply left. He did not ask for thanks. Another day, he saw her woodpile was nearly gone. He spent the next 2 days at the edge of the woods, his hands, soft and unaccustomed to labor, blistering and bleeding as he chopped and stacked a mountain of firewood, enough to last her through the winter. He started leaving small things on her doorstep in the early morning hours. A string of fresh fish, a basket of vegetables from the market, a carved toy soldier for Leo. He never stayed to be seen. They were offerings, silent acts of service. He was not trying to be a duke. He was trying to be a man, a useful man. Leo was the first to soften. The boy was naturally curious and unafraid. He began to approach Alistair on the beach, asking him questions. "Why are your hands all cut up?" "Do you know how to skip stones?" Alistair answered him gently, never pushing, never mentioning their connection. He taught the boy how to skip stones until they bounced 7, 8 times across the water. He told him stories of knights and dragons. He saw the boy's intelligence, his kindness, and knew with a painful certainty that it was all Alara's work. Alara watched these interactions with a wary, conflicted heart. She had built her fortress of anger and resentment so high, but this quiet, persistent man was slowly dismantling it, stone by stone. He was not the cold, arrogant duke she remembered. He was humbled. He was patient. He was atoning. The sight of him, a powerful nobleman with his hands raw and his clothes dirty from mending her roof, stirred something in her she had long thought dead. A reluctant, dangerous flicker of hope. The investigator arrived a month later, bringing with him a leather satchel full of documents. It contained a sworn, tearful confession from the midwife, Agnes, and a more reluctant but equally damning statement from the housemaid, Mary, whom Sharp had located living in a northern city. It also included detailed records of the money transfers from an account controlled by Lady Beatrice. The proof was absolute. Armed with this arsenal, Alistair knew what he had to do next. He had to tear down the lie at its source. He left Port Blossom for the first time in weeks, leaving Alara with a simple promise. "I am going to fix this. I will be back." His return to Blackwood Manor was that of an avenging angel. He strode into the drawing room where Lady Beatrice was taking her afternoon tea, his face set like granite. He did not greet her. He simply tossed the satchel of documents onto the table in front of her, scattering her porcelain cup and saucer. "It's over, Beatrice," he said, his voice deadly calm. She paled as she looked at the papers, her composure finally cracking. For a moment she tried to lie, to bluster, but the look in Alistair's eyes, a cold, merciless fury she had never seen before, silenced her. The confrontation was brutal and swift. He laid out her sins, her greed, her monstrous betrayal. She had done it, she finally admitted in a venomous hiss, because she could not stand to see a weak, common girl as the Duchess. She wanted to control the estate, to install a bride of her own choosing, to maintain her power. Alara and her child had been obstacles to be removed. He did not shout. He did not rage. His voice remained chillingly level as he pronounced her sentence. "You will be out of this house by sunset. Your accounts will be frozen. Your name will be a curse in this family for all time. You will be exiled, and if you ever attempt to contact me or my family again, I will see you imprisoned for the rest of your life." He turned and walked away, leaving her amidst the ruins of her life's ambition. He felt no satisfaction, only a profound, soul-deep weariness. He had purged the poison from his house, but the scars remained. He returned to Port Blossom 2 days later. He did not go to the cottage immediately. He walked down to the beach, needing the vast, cleansing emptiness of the sea to clear his head. He found Alara there, waiting for him. She must have seen him arrive. She said nothing, just stood watching the waves roll in. He told her everything. He told her of the confrontation, of Beatrice's confession, of her exile. He spared no detail of his own blindness, his own culpability in the tragedy. He confessed his arrogance, his emotional cowardice, how he had allowed himself to be manipulated because it was easier than forging a true connection with his own wife. It was a full, unsparing admission of his every failure. When he was finished, he stood before her, stripped bare of all his pride and defenses. He was just a man, flawed and broken, hoping for a mercy he did not deserve. She was silent for a long time. Then she took a step toward him. "You went back," she said softly. "You destroyed her lies. You cleared my name." "I righted a wrong that I allowed to happen," he corrected. She looked into his eyes, and for the first time in 7 years, he did not see anger or contempt. He saw a deep, aching sadness, and beneath it, the faintest glimmer of forgiveness. A week later, a small crisis broke the fragile truce between them. Leo, climbing on the slippery rocks near the shore, fell and cut his knee badly. It was a deep, bleeding gash. Alara was trying to clean it, but the boy was crying and frightened. Alistair, hearing the commotion, ran over. Without thinking, he knelt, scooped the sobbing boy into his arms, and held him close. "Hush now, little lion," he murmured, his voice a low, soothing rumble. "It's just a scratch, a battle wound for a brave captain." He tended to the wound with a surprising gentleness, his large hands steady and sure as he cleaned and bandaged it. He distracted Leo with a story from his own boyhood, about falling out of a great oak tree and being prouder of the scar than the injury. Leo's sobs subsided, replaced by fascinated hiccups. Elara watched, her heart clenching. She saw not the Duke of Blackwood, but a father. The father her son had never had. The man her husband could have been, was perhaps finally becoming. In that unguarded, instinctive moment of tenderness, the last of her defenses crumbled. That evening she found him on her porch step, staring out at the darkening sea. She came out with a blanket and draped it over his shoulders. "Thank you," she said, "for what you did today. For everything." He turned to look at her, his gray eyes full of a weary hope. "Elara," he began, but she put a finger to his lips. "I believe you," she said simply. "I believe you didn't know, and I forgive you for not knowing." The words were quiet, but they landed with the force of a thunderclap. Forgiveness. It was a gift, freely given, and he knew in his soul he had not fully earned it yet. But it was a start. It was everything. He did not ask her to come back to Blackwood. He did not ask her to be his Duchess again. He asked something far more important. "Would Eleanor Thorne," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "and her son, Leo, consider allowing Alistair to be a part of their lives? Here, if this is where you want to stay, I will stay." She looked at the sea, at the village that had been her sanctuary, and then back at him. She had found her strength here, her independence, but her son deserved his birthright, and she was tired of running. It was time to build, not just survive. "No," she said, and his face fell. "We will not stay here, but we will not be returning to the Blackwood you left. We will go home, together, and we will make it a home, not a prison. We will be partners, Alistair, in everything." Their return to the duchy was not a quiet affair, but a deliberate one. Alistair publicly acknowledged his son and heir, and told a carefully edited but powerful story of a terrible medical error and his wife's long, private convalescence. He restored Elara to her rightful place, not as a fragile duchess, but as a formidable partner whose counsel he sought in all matters. Blackwood Manor was transformed. The heavy, oppressive drapes were torn down, letting sunlight flood the once gloomy rooms. The stern, judging portraits of ancestors were replaced with bright seascapes of the Port Blossom coast. They used the vast Blackwood fortune to build a new school and a hospital in the village that had sheltered them, ensuring the people who had shown Elara kindness would never want for anything. The final scene of their old life played out at the grand marble tomb. Together they stood before it, Leo between them, holding both their hands. Alistair had arranged for the inscription to be changed. It now read simply, "Love is stronger than death." It was a monument not to a lie, but to a resurrection. One evening, months later, Elara came into the library. The room, once Alistair's lonely sanctuary, was now the heart of their home. A fire crackled warmly in the hearth. Leo was sprawled on the rug, fast asleep with a book on his chest, and Alistair was on the floor beside him, a small knife and a piece of wood in his hands, carefully mending the mast on one of Leo's toy boats. He looked up as she entered, and his face broke into a smile, a real smile, one that reached his slate-gray eyes and erased the last shadows of his 7-year winter. He was no longer the cold, remote Duke. He was a husband and a father. He was home. Elara knelt beside him, her hand covering his. The house was no longer silent. It was filled with the soft sounds of a crackling fire, the whisper of pages turning, and the gentle breathing of a sleeping child. It was the sound of a life rebuilt, not on duty or title, but on a foundation of hard-won forgiveness, and a love that had, against all odds, found its way back from the grave. Alistair finally understood. The smaller name on that gravestone had not just been his son's, it had been his own. He had been a ghost in his own life, and the knock of a small boy's hand on his door had been the thing that finally called him home.